Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hello and welcome to The Foretop, a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. And now for the menu for our first show of 2017. First, the New Year's cleanse, juice or snake oil. Second, Foraging 2.0. And finally, finding patriotism through food. Our esteemed panelists here in the studios of OPB are Liz Crain, culinary author and fermentation expert. Hey, Liz.
Hello.
And Heather Arndt Anderson, culinary historian, botanist, and food writer. Welcome, Heather.
Hello there.
And Virginia Gewin, a journalist covering food security and crop diversity for publications such as Nature, Science, and Modern Farmer. Hey, Virginia.
Hi, Catherine.
Let's bite into our first course, the New Year's cleanse. Is it juice or is it snake oil? Every major American metropolis is sprouting juice joints that offer fresh-squeezed, cold-pressed, green organic juices for a mere $6 to $8 per serving. What is driving this trend? Is it healthy? And what is its impact on the environment, not to mention our pocketbooks? Virginia Gewin, I feel like you're going to have an interesting perspective on this. Do your New Year's resolutions include a juice cleanse?
Well, Catherine, if a juice cleanse is all it took to detox from 2016, I would be the first to embrace a fructose stupor. Unfortunately, juice cleanses are probably more snake oil than a wellness solution. Juice cleanses can be wasteful, costly, and even dangerous, particularly if you are, for example, diabetic, and the restricted diet lowers your blood sugar. So I'm probably going to pass. But let's be clear that we're really talking about cleanses, and that's, not just a random glass of juice. The cleanse is when you really go all in and just drink juice for all your meals for several days. There can be, health costs as well as environmental costs. So where do we want to start?
I've always wondered why people don't just go ahead and eat the raw fruits and vegetables and get all that fiber and the lignans and stuff that your body really needs, because you're just kind of mainlining the carbs when you do the cleanse, and I don't feel like that is a really good choice.
Right. So there can be a health cost of concentrating all the fruits, sugar, and tossing the fiber. Cleanses are usually really low in protein, and so it can force your body to break down muscle, and not fat. If you want clean eating, doctors typically recommend replacing alcohol and junk food with fruits, vegetables, and lean meat. And really, your body doesn't need to detox anything. You have organs that are there to do that.
I feel like there are so many ways to have delicious juice where you just include all of the fiber and the pulp and like aguas frescas, the Mexican fruit drinks that you can get. I do that a lot. In the summer, I'll have cantaloupe and different berries. I'll just throw them all in the blender and smoothie, whatever you want to call it. But I just don't understand why you would get rid of all of that yummy stuff.
Yeah, mix it all in.
Yeah.
It's all good.
You know, Liz, actually the smoothie was only invented about 30 years ago or so by a guy who was lactose intolerant. He was working in a Shake Shack making milkshakes, and he really felt like he couldn't enjoy any of the treats, so he just started blending up the frozen fruits. And it wasn't because he wanted to make something new and healthy. It's just that he literally would have a stomach ache if he drank the milkshakes. And so they were actually not even invented to be healthy.
Well, Virginia, let's get back to what you were mentioning about the environmental impact. Sounds like there's not much we can recommend in terms of the health.
Right. It's even more disturbing when you start to look at the environmental costs. Modern Farmer did a piece early in 2016 that kind of laid out the waste, which I found really, really shocking, honestly. A single 16-ounce serving of cold-pressed juice generates, on average, 3.5 pounds of pulp waste. When you have 100 million 16-ounce servings of cold-pressed juice sold domestically in 2015, that really adds up. The amount of pulp waste was estimated that wound up in landfills last year totaled about 175,000 tons. Ugh. And the end result is that methane is generated as pulp decays, equivalent to about 200,000 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And methane, as some of you may know, is about the most potent greenhouse gas that you can have out there. It's about 34 times that of CO2 on a 100-year scale. So that is a disaster of what's landing up in our landfills. That's not only not giving us any health benefit, it's actually harming our health in the aggregate globally.
That is just shocking and horrifying. And it gets back to a theme we talk about a lot in this show, which is food waste. And I'm sure the people who own these juice bars don't have chickens in the back. Like, Heather, you have chickens, don't you?
I do, yeah. And I feed them all kinds of groovy stuff. Like, I mean, I don't juice, but whenever I have any kind of scraps at all, I just give them to the girls, and they love them.
I just wonder, I mean, so we're basically saying there's no basis for this trend. Does anyone have any idea where it might have come from?
Drinking juice, not just as a cleanse, but fruit juices were first introduced to American diets very early in the 19th century because kids were suffering from all kinds of nutritional deficiencies, and it was a really easy way to get kids some vitamins before cereals began being fortified.
Well, I actually called kind of a celebrity naturopathic physician and nutritionist named Dr. Samantha Brody, or she's also known as Dr. Samantha, on the recommendation of a frequent panelist on this show, Laura Russell. And I have to say, I kind of expected her to embrace juicing just because it's kind of groovy and I don't know. And she agreed with you all regarding it just not being a healthy thing to do. And I was really struck by her advice, which resonates with what you all have been saying, which was this time of year, according to Chinese medicine, it can be jarring to your system to drink a bunch of cold juice, among all the other problems she mentioned. So she recommends, surprise, just having some hot soup, some hot veggie soup, maybe hot chicken soup, get your protein. And that was really, she said, if you really want to be healthy in 2017, just, steamed veggies and nice vegetable soup. So that was kind of a nice surprise and also much more cost effective, I would think. Liz, what do you think?
Well, I have sort of a funny story. When my last long-term relationship of 11 years, when it was kind of heading south, I came home from a hike with my girlfriend and we walked into the kitchen, and my ex now, he had a juicer, and he had probably $30 or $40 worth of really nice fruit and veg from our local Portland gourmet shopping store. And he was juicing, and I was a little bit surprised, but what's going on? He said, I'm going on a juice cleanse in the next couple weeks. I'm just going to be having juice. And I show a lot of my love through cooking, and it was just sort of a way for him to take that away and for us to realize, like, we're probably not meant to be together anymore. And then when he moved out, he left the juicer.
Oh,
so
man.
I still have this juicer, which I've never used.
Adding insult to
I was
injury.
just going to say the same thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's not for me. But I mean, if there's a lot of, like, if you go to, there was a store that I think it's still open actually when I lived in Southeast called Limbo. So it's just a bulk, lots of fruit and veg that's like almost past its prime. And so if you have a lot of that, a lot of surplus that needs to be dealt with right away, then I could see, making a big batch of some kind of juice with it, just if that's, being resourceful and whatnot. But otherwise, going to the store and purchasing perfectly delicious, $30 to $40 worth of fruit and vegetables for a pint of juice just seems ridiculous.
There must be places to shop all over the country where you can buy just a bag of, like grade B produce like they used to have at Limbo in Portland. And because those are great for not just juicing, but you can also use that stuff for canning, which is a really good cost-saving way to put up a little food in the cupboard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, WebMD, the online site, even says the only type of detox diet that is worthwhile is the one that limits processed high-fat, sugary foods and replaces them with whole foods like fruits and vegetables. And I don't know why that's a hard concept. I mean, you think
People
about
hear the fruits and vegetables and they just want like the juicy essence, right? Makes it easier.
Yeah, but it just seems, I don't know, for someone that just loves crunchy, like texture and crunch and like goodness, you just think, just eat the whole damn thing.
Yeah, you don't get that physical sensation of satisfaction. Oh, the other thing that Dr. Samantha mentioned to me in our conversation was she sees a lot of people who are trying to diet and they don't eat enough calories during the day. Maybe they're on a juice diet and they end up just pigging out at night, which, again, is just terrible for you. Worse for you than... Yeah. I will say I've been to a couple of these juice bars, and I have figured out it makes a lot more sense to get a smoothie because it's much more filling. But there is this weird psychological effect where you do somehow feel like you're cleaner. I don't know. Your system is cleaner. There's like ginger, and there's kale in that juice. And it does, I think it's purely psychological. But then I see people who come in and they're on, they get on these programs where they're buying like 3 or 4 juices a day, and it's so expensive. I want to encourage our listeners, if they're thinking about doing it, to not don't juice.
I think my summer juicing diet is margaritas.
I was just going to say, or
good.
daiquiris. Just puree some fruit and add rum.
That sounds good to me. All right. Well, I think we've pretty much agreed here that friends don't let friends juice. I guess it's time to move on to our next topic. Let's graze on Foraging 2.0. The world's oldest way of gathering food has crossed paths with the world's newest way of gathering information. Suddenly, foragers are finding their wild edibles not through generational teachings, but through phone apps and websites. Has technology changed the ancient practice of foraging for you, Liz Crain?
Not so much, but there are some interesting things to be gained. First, should I just kind of define what foraging is? Do you think that would be helpful?
Absolutely.
So when you're foraging, you are going out into the wild. It could be urban, it could be the wilderness, and you are collecting foodstuffs, so berries, nuts, any kind of fruit, leafy greens that are growing naturally. So they have not been cultivated. I love to forage. I do a lot of foraging in all of the seasons, even winter, a little bit of mushroom hunting before we get a deep freeze. I find it a really nice outdoor adventure that I end up at home after it with delicious foods that I can make into things for people that I love. So I go and collect in the spring. I'll collect dandelion leaves and flowers. I'll collect morel mushrooms. Anyhow, it's a large part of my life, and I love it. So these days there are some apps that you can use that kind of help you locate, identify, and then use all of the different wild edibles that are out there. So I think that we all tried using one or two of them. I tried the Wild Edibles Lite, and I think that, Catherine, you tried the full Wild Edibles app version.
Tried.
You tried to,
but it wanted to download a huge number of gigantic photo files.
Oh, okay.
So I had to give up after paying $6 for it.
Well, I kind of went through it, and as I understand, it's the light version is just 20 plants instead of, I think, 150 or 200 that's on the Pay For app. And it was good. It's A through Z, so you can kind of choose what plant you're interested in. I chose dandelions because most of us know them, use them. So it sort of tells you on one screen how to locate them. So more disturbed areas, in parking strips in the city, lawns. It tells you how to identify them. There's no poisonous look-alike, so that's good to know, and then how to use them, so cooking with them. But I'm just interested in what your other Heather, did you use one of the foraging apps?
In the past, I've used one of our local websites for cataloging the locations of fruit trees. And fruit tree projects exist all around the country where you can either join like an urban gleaners type group and go help harvest fruit that's not being used in people's yards or in people's properties, and then keep some of it for yourself and donate some to food banks. But I grew up – my mother was from the Redwoods, and so she had sort of instilled in me this love of just eating stuff that I found around. And I actually used to climb a lot of the trees and eat a lot of weird plants that I found in Portland, Oregon. I knew where all the hazelnut trees were, where all the blackberry bushes and the alleys were. And so I had a mental map of all of those things. And then later when I got a degree in botany, I remembered some of the information that I had gathered throughout my life and was able to sort of pick things up. But that's a very different and very much more laborious approach to what has definitely been simplified by technology.
I think that's really useful, though, the urban localized gleaning apps and websites, because there's something to be gained. Whereas I feel like an app needs to serve a purpose that a book can't, or a radio program can't, or some other type of media. But the foraging app that I used, all of the books that I have on foraging do it better. And there's more information. There's multiple stages of plant photos of identifying them. What do you think, Virginia? Did you use?
I like Heather. I usually, if I use anything, it's the falling fruit. It's the urban stuff. I think there's a weird, as you're sitting here talking, I'm thinking about how there's this distinction in my mind between kind of the wild versus the urban foraging and how they're two really different worlds. I mean, they also attract really different people. I mean, when I first moved to the Pacific Northwest, I started to go mushroom hunting with a lot of the old locals that had their special secret places. And I feel like that's like one of the big things about wild foraging that maybe can get lost in the mix is that, some of these areas, especially if they're on native lands, they're sacred. There are secret spots that people protect with a whole lot of gusto. I mean, there's a lot of don't tread on me. And that can be kind of actually a potential for conflict out there.
It's funny because in Europe they have laws that protect what is called every man's rights to walk unimpeded and collect flowers, berries, mushrooms, what have you. And it's part of their cultural identity is having this freedom for foraging. And people for generations take their kids out for these overnight camping trips. And there's definitely, like what you said, Virginia, this is don't tread on me. This is my property. Get off my property. And it can get scary out there.
Well, also get out of my secret mushroom spot, as Virginia was saying, because now there are so many professional foragers who are supplying restaurants and such, and they're making their living off of this. So they don't want anyone else to know where they're going. Well, it's interesting because it sounds like there's a disconnect. There are these websites that locate foods that you can forage, but they tend to be in urban locations. And the apps, which we're getting I was seeing a lot of articles about them over the past year, and it sounds like they're really not that great. I played with a few of them, and I didn't really find them to be that useful because all they were doing was defining and identifying plants, but you had to already know what the name of the plant was in order to look it up. I couldn't find an app that did the old thing that great old Wild Edibles books have done for many years, which is kind of that choose your own adventure flow chart. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where it says, if it looks like this, go to page this.
Dichotomous key is what
there's
dichotomous key.
There's a scientific name for it. I had no idea. I grew up, my parents, I grew up hunting mushrooms on Whidbey Island in Washington with my parents. But yeah, I had no idea there was an actual name for those books.
I would much prefer calling it choose your own adventure than a dichotomous key.
As long as that adventure doesn't end badly with a poisonous mushroom.
That's true. With mushrooms, you really do need to be careful. But, I find that there's some intersectionality between this, Yule Gibbons, tastes just like wild hickory nuts, wild man approach, and then the, hippie urban tree climbers who want to get some free fruit. Because there are little hidden chunks in our city, Portland, Oregon, at least, and I'm sure in other places throughout the West and the East, where you can find these little pockets that are sort of not protected necessarily, but I know a really good nettle spot in southeast Portland that I go to every spring. And I think as long as people are respectful and don't take everything, those types of foragers are always welcome.
Well, there are rules, not rules, so to speak, but there are guidelines, kind of stewardship guidelines that a lot of people promote about, if you go to a patch, never harvest any more than 5% of a particular plant or population. So if you look around and there's not at least 20 plants of the species that you're after, don't take any whole plants. Just really be thoughtful about your judgment and use your judgment to kind of look and see, am I leaving something behind so that for others or for the health and population of this plant species? I mean, it's just kind of – otherwise you can see how very easily, somebody can come in and just destroy a whole grove. It's just going to be gone. And so I think that's also just not taking more than you can – process or use in any one time. I mean, don't get greedy.
Don't be a dick is always a good
be a dick.
Policy.
I don't know. With nettles, I kind of want to be a dick, but I don't like them very much. Liz, were you going to say something?
Well, I think that something to keep in mind that's really helpful. So we've all sort of in different ways talked about the old mushroom pickers that you met when you first moved to Portland, Virginia, or friends and family that we've grown up with that have shown us, the ways of where to find these foraged foods and how to pick them and use them. I think that that's a good tack to take, is try and find someone who you can learn from. And that could be, like in Portland, we have the Oregon Mycological Society, or we have John Kalis and his Wild Food Adventures. There are different societies and businesses that can kind of, you can get one-on-one or in a group with an expert who, it's very sensory, and you want to, I think, like, I want less screen time in my life, so I don't want to be out in the wild looking at my tiny computer that is my phone. So I would much rather, go out with a group and see and touch and smell and get down on my hands and knees and touch things. And so, I mean, I think the apps are good to use, at home as a, just a multifaceted way of, use an app, use a book, go out in the field with people. But I think if you're just out foraging, I don't know. I think just using your phone for GPS and photos is probably the best route.
Agree.
Yeah.
Same.
All right. Sounds like we're all agreed on that one.
No juicing.
No juicing.
We're just going to crap on it.
I did bring in some things that we could taste, have a little break in between segments. Thinking of foraging, I have been thinking about vermouth, which historically was a fortified wine that people would make using foraged herbs and spices. And in fact, you can look up a recipe for homemade vermouth online if you'd like, but I don't recommend you try it yourself because you can purchase something really delicious like what we have here today. This one is from a producer named Hammer and Tongs, and it is called Sacrezine. And I guess it's based on the resins that were the sacred resins, sacrezine, that were traditionally used to make incenses for religious ceremonies, so like frankincense and myrrh. So
Very
what do you all
biblical.
think about it?
Hella biblical.
Delicious.
Yes, delicious.
I really like the botanical aromatics. I don't ever really sit and sip vermouth. I mean, it's sort of like partway to a Manhattan as far as I'm concerned. But I would definitely drink a Manhattan made with this. But it is a good sipper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can identify any of the botanicals. Usually I can sort of taste some
You get a little licorice
juniper.
root.
Oh, licorice root.
I just get that like little bit of glycyrrhizic, like that, slippery mouthfeel. That sounds disgusting. I'm not selling it, but no, it's really good.
Just say mucilaginous, and then we'll all be there with you.
Well, the other thing I brought is something that you could make by foraging, and that is a candy. It's a Oregon honey and hazelnut caramel made by Quinn Candy here in Portland. But yeah, in Oregon, you could totally forage honey and fallen hazelnuts. Did you guys try this candy? Do you like it?
Tasty.
A
little crunchy.
Love it. I mean, and I should probably admit that I am kind of a caramel whore. Like, I will eat those Brock's out of the bulk bins at, like, Safeway.
Oh.
the Brock's cubes that you can melt down.
Everyone, it's Heather. If you see the crazy woman at Safeway.
Shoveling beige cubes into her face. This blows anything. And I don't want to disparage our friends at Brock's. But, yeah, these handmade caramels are really dynamite.
I was at a craft show last night, and artisanal caramels were all the rage, along with the bitters and the homemade booze. So
I think Valentine's Day, too, is a really good, stock up for, we get out of the woods with our heavy treats during the holidays, and then we're ready to jump back in a month later.
I know that Quinn also, they have a cookbook that's coming out this spring from 10 Speed. So, in a couple months, we can all try our hand at making these.
Cool.
Yeah.
And now let's chew on our meaty third course, finding patriotism through food. A century ago, the United States entered World War I. At that time, the U.S. Food Administration began a campaign that sounds to our contemporary ears very much like the teachings of a food polemicist like Michael Pollan or Mark Bittman. As we consider the new year and a new presidential administration, I thought we should look back at the ways in which food and nationalism were intertwined in previous eras. Fortunately, we have a food historian with us. So, Heather Arndt Anderson, can we make America great again through food?
I think we can, but maybe not through the wartime rationing of your – and it's funny that you said you wanted to get into the meat of it because it was very much about how much meat we could eliminate from our diets as average household average Americans. And if you look back on the type of rationing that the U.S. Food Administration wanted average households to do, it was mostly getting rid of beef, pork, and wheat, which leaves a lot left to eat. And so I wonder, like, what sort of sense of restriction were people feeling with only these three things being removed from their diets? It must have been a very meat, like beef and wheat-heavy diet before we all had to do our bit to, to save the meat and wheat for the boys out on the front lines. And then also to save some of that also for the European families who were very much suffering with food shortages. It was patriotic and it was it was giving of oneself, but it doesn't to me seem like that much of a sacrifice now that we sort of are more of a white meat and veg and different grains friendly society.
But it was the beginning of Meatless Mondays, which I didn't realize until I started reading about this. I thought Meatless Mondays came about like 10 years ago.
I know, and I still do Meatless Mondays just as it seems like a healthy way to feed my family. It's not out of any patriotic duty. One thing that I think is kind of interesting for us to consider is when we talk about food patriotism and what being patriotic means. There's definitely a new definition of that emerging with this new presidential administration. I think that we cannot call ourselves American without having this sort of the melting pot. Our nation is defined as a society of many cultures, and that is seriously reflected in the way we eat, the way we cook, the way we eat at home, the way we eat in restaurants. And for us to say that being American is any one thing is very unpatriotic.
That's a good point.
Agreed. What I thought was interesting about the past, the World War I era patriotism was that, even a 1929 Saturday Evening Post article made the statements that Americans began to look seriously into the question of what and how much they were eating. And lots of people discovered for the first time that they could eat less and feel no worse and frequently feel much better. Mm-hmm. And I think because it wasn't just Meatless Mondays, it was Wheatless Wednesdays. There were all of these, like fats and sugars were also things that were, tried voluntarily rationed, I guess. And it just seems like everyone got to a better place just physically, and maybe our diets diversified a little bit more, and that all of that good came out of trying to do something globally, but also really ended up helping individually as well. I thought that was really cool.
I like how some of the conservation efforts, although they were, initially introduced as a way to save resources for soldiers, ended up really informing bigger changes in America and the way we treat saving. I still have a jar of bacon fat next to my stove. I actually, a lot of what I do, I'm like, damn, I'm like from the Depression because I save, bones. When we get a rotisserie chicken, I'll take the bones that my kid ate the meat off of and put them in a bag in the freezer and make stock out of it. And it's like I'm this old, Depression-era housewife. I just don't like throwing things away. And I don't know if it's growing up poor or being like a modern, post-hippie person, but I hate wasting things.
It seems like that Depression-era saving and being resourceful and kind of can-do attitude takes many generations to subside, and hopefully it doesn't and you keep it alive. And I mean, I compost everything. I don't have a chicken or chickens, but I have a dog, so he'll eat the scraps. But not that that's really being that resourceful, but the composting is, that's a way to do something better with all of those scraps. But
I feel like it skipped a generation. I feel like my grandmother, I learned so much watching her and how she existed in the world that really I imprinted on that. And my parents were the throwaway generation, if there ever was one. And so it's just kind of that weird, why did it resonate so much with me and kind of come back in a lot of the things that I'm doing now? I saw her and I saw the logic behind why you wouldn't waste these things, how you could eke out even that much more, nutrition or, calories out of something. Like, how did that just completely seem to skip this whole generation? And what's bringing it back alive
Feminism.
now?
It's because our grandmothers were pre-feminist. Our mothers grew up, with this notion that stepping away from the stove is like the way to gain your freedom. And we're sort of, I wouldn't say this is a backlash, but our, second wave feminism or even third wave feminism is taking the lessons from our grandmothers who were proto-feminist, and some of them are old enough to have actually had jobs during World War II and who first fed their children boxed breakfast cereal so that they could have a job and an identity outside of the home. Our mother's generation, or my mother's generation of the 70s was – had the full-time job and went to college and was not really interested in, gleaning what she could from her mother's generation.
Oh, this is also interesting. How can we I've just been sort of toying with this idea over the past week or so. I'm just wondering, how can we be patriotic today with our food choices? Is it patriotic to only support small local farmers?
I think so. I think that's really, put your money where your mouth is, and I'm going to probably I'm just going to go out and say it. Like a lot of choices that we make as, vegans or people who want to eat a specific grain, we need to think about things besides just, we're not eating meat. We're eating something that was grown, thousands of miles away. And so thinking about carbon footprint as being intertwined in the way we make our decisions as patriots or as environmentalists needs to be part of the conversation.
I just wonder if we can reclaim this language and take it back and say patriotism is about...
It's not a dirty word.
Yeah, making smart decisions about what you're eating and where you're sourcing your food from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having a goal of even just living once in a while off of a diet that was from within 100 miles of your home it's a fun, project to at least try. But, just being conscious of where our foods come from and who's growing it and what their lives are like,
Well, even think about like victory gardens were a big thing in World War I. Everyone, like every square inch of available land in city public spaces, everyone was encouraged to have their own home garden. And in a way, we kind of have that victory now because everyone has a garden in Portland or like knows somebody that has a big garden or wants to garden, or there are public places where we really support these gardens. And so I feel like in that, kind of weird way, like the victory garden is still alive and we're still keeping that torch kind of lit.
That's true. And it's not just in Portland, because I know like very bougie, wives of doctors who live in, very bougie suburbs in Colorado who grow vegetables and do some canning. And maybe it's the trendiness of it that's providing this momentum. But, by whatever means necessary, it's a really good trend.
Mm-hmm. And edible schoolyards were, I believe, started during World War I, and that is something we can all do is just go volunteer in our neighborhood edible schoolyard. Because I hear, Heather, were you saying when we were speaking earlier that edible schoolyards have been getting less and less attention over recent years? I was speaking to someone about this.
You weren't speaking to me, but my son's school has a garden that provides some food for their cafeteria. And I don't want to get too far into like off the beaten track, but there are opportunities for educating children about where their food comes from and about botany and about horticulture. And there are obviously opportunities for families who have the opportunity or the ability to volunteer to do that, do some gardening, do some weeding. And then also to provide children with a culinary education on how their food is prepared. It helps to really eliminate some of that picky eating that we see in a lot of kids when they are part of the process and they're not being forced to just eat what's in front of them. I think you see a real attitude shift.
What about home ec? What do you think about home ec?
Home ec is my my heart just went pit-a-pat.
I know, right? It was
Where'd
great.
It go?
Where did it go?
Well, it's, I think, again, and I'm not throwing feminism under the bus, but it's, home ec programs were introduced in public schools, like middle schools and high schools, about 100 years ago. Was part of the curriculum for most young women. And then in the 70s or 80s, boys could also take cooking classes. And it's funny because a lot of times boys I knew in home ec would stand by this. Most chefs of the world are men. Like that was their defense for being in home ec.
Okay.
Like they weren't going to be cooks. They were going to be chefs. But culinary education is ready for its comeback. And I think that I just had a piece in Render magazine this past summer about how home economics and domestic science is like very proto-feminist, giving women these tools they could use for whatever they wanted. They could free up time to take vacation if they wanted to, or like take up their own interests. But having an arsenal of ingredients and tricks and tools has really I think people are taking it for granted.
So you're saying once again that feminism has been sort of at odds with the progressive food movement, it sounds like. It's kind of sad.
I think that it hasn't been at odds with it. It has been part of the framework that is being forgotten. I think that feminists of, I'd say the generation before mine, are, getting above their raisin when it comes to like understanding the relationship that feminism had in driving these movements that we think of as being a way to have alleviated ourselves from drudgery. But there was always just like part of the driving force.
Liz, do you feel like you're engaging in drudgery? When I see your Instagram feed of your beautiful, speaking of things that you forage, your beautiful chanterelles.
Yeah. Well, I just want to go back to home ec because I really feel like it's important. We put a lot of energy lately because of our wonderful Obamas into the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act and school lunch programs. But and that's great. And that's, fresh fruit and veg and all the lunches, more grains, more whole foods. But our children need to be learning, and if they're not learning at home, they need to be learning how to make their own food. And that's just really something that I think a lot of us take for granted. We're all, in various realms of food research and writing. And but yeah, I cooked some very disgusting things in home ec, but it was empowering still because then I thought, oh, I want to make that better at home, and maybe I can do something in the kitchen tonight instead of mom or dad. So,
Liz, where did you take home ec? What
in
city?
Cincinnati public school. Yeah. So we the boys and the girls did the cooking and woodworking. So it was
great.
Yeah, 2-prong
Sewing. Did you do sewing too?
We did not do sewing. Oh. I did learn how to type on a typewriter though. So it was a long time ago.
Virginia, did you ever take home ec?
I did.
Yeah.
I have a bad sewing incident that I can't even go into. My mom still has the proof. It's awful.
Oh, wow.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, Heather, did you said you did take it.
I took home ec in middle school and in high school. And then that piece I wrote for Render was about the woman who created the home ec program for Portland Public Schools. And she wrote a cooking column for the Oregonian and went on to be the director of domestic education or domestic science at U of O. She was, a very impressive woman, and her name was Lillian Tingle. She's very dear to me. But I still remember making cream scones in 9th grade home ec, and making kung pao chicken, which was very progressive. And, this was the early 90s, so maybe it was just that was what people expected young women to learn how to make.
All right, well, bring back home ec. It sounds like we're all on this topic as well. Well, how about we lighten up with a little bit of dessert? I will get us started. I was thinking about the great old foraging books, and I remembered I have this wonderful book that I had to pull out called All That the Rain Promises and More.
I love that book. The funny little man on the cover.
It's like Chuck Mangione.
There is this funny little man, as Liz said. He's wearing a tuxedo. He has this maniacal grin on his face, and he's holding a trumpet. And all I can think is maybe these are trumpet mushrooms that he's holding in the other hand. And he's like running through the forest, looking like he just committed some horrible crime. And it is just so weird. It's 10-speed press. I believe the year on my book is 1991, but I'm wondering if that's a reprint because there are lots of very 70s style photos with 70s vibe to them. And And they're just all these like jokey captions, and the photos are just weird people wearing giant mushrooms as hats. I mean, and then there's like an old photo of Dr. Andrew Weil in his like full hippie paraphernalia. There's a chapter on consciousness altering mushrooms. So yeah, get on Amazon or wherever and order this book right away because it's just a hoot. So that's my recommendation. How about you, Liz?
Well, and it's great because it's hands-free. So we were talking about the foraging. It's so tiny. You can fit it in your back pocket.
It's a pocketbook.
Yeah, you don't have to lug a huge book out with you, but you can have this skinny little awesomeness.
Is that also the author of Mushrooms Demystified?
I think you're right.
That's Paul Stamets.
Okay.
Which is, I think, maybe not.
This guy is David Aurora, and I know he wrote another mushroom book, but I don't know what the title is.
The other mushroom book is huge, and it weighs like 30
the blue,
pounds.
Yeah. That one's great, too.
Yeah.
I have a book as well. I brought a copy of Wild Fermentation because it is the book that has changed my life for the best in cooking. And there's a new edition that just came out. The original, the book came out in 2003. It's by Sandor Alex Katz. And if you love fermented foods like miso and vinegar and sauerkraut and kimchi, and the list goes on, full-flavored, bright fermented foods, then you can have your hand at it and try some of these recipes. It's 100 more pages. There are photographs now in this edition. The first edition had illustrations. And in about a month, I'm going to be doing an event for anyone who's in the Portland area at Powell's with him for it. So I highly recommend it.
And
Lots of great recipes.
What's the date of that event?
It is February 12th at 7:30 p.m. So he'll be in town talking all about the new edition.
At the Burnside?
It's at the downtown.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a great book. Really fun. I'm making a ginger beer for the first time this week, so I started my ginger bug. Have you made it before, Heather?
I haven't, but they have a lot at Hong Fat right now. The Chinese grocery store nearest my house has just, like pallets of ginger and...
Yeah. I just had some extra ginger because I made tom yum soup, and I thought, I love ginger beer. Let's try it. It's really easy. So it's just starting to bubble now.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Cocktails, that's all I can think.
I know.
Dark and stormy.
Yes.
Speaking of books, speaking of home ec and of patriotism and such, it's this year's the 75th anniversary of MFK Fisher's book, How to Cook a Wolf. And for those of you like myself who are facing this coming year with some trepidation and a little bit of, I'll leave it at trepidation. I'm really looking forward to diving back into that book. It's her very quirky and wry style of food writing is very conversational and has definitely influenced my style in ways I didn't even realize. Chapters like How to Survive. It's like, she wrote it during the end of World War II, I think, and or the beginning of it. And it was just like her approach to how to deal with all this crazy BS that was going on.
Great recommendation. How about you, Virginia?
Well, I had the good fortune to go to Iceland a few months ago, and I just wanted to put a bug in people's head if anyone's headed that way, which tourism in Iceland is off the charts. It's just kind of going like gangbusters there. But if you're there, never turn down a dairy product. Their cattle breed was brought over from the Vikings, and it's never interbred with other varieties. And these don't produce as much quantity of milk as, say, a Holstein, but the quality is amazing. The butter, ice cream, skyr, a lot of products like skyr you'll probably see in Whole Foods or different markets around. It's a really high-fat yogurt that's coming out of Iceland. And so don't forget agritourism. Iceland's got a budding agritourism industry, which sounds really not normal. But yes, agritourism in Iceland is the way to go.
Please tell me you had jam on pizza there.
I did not have jam on pizza. All I could have had, all I needed there was butter, bread, and a bowl of soup, and I was in heaven.
Pretty much a Viking then.
I totally was a Viking.
That sounds really good this time of year, too.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, everybody. Special thanks to all of you guys, you inspirational panelists. Virginia Gewin, just back from Iceland and a science journalist. Heather Arndt Anderson, whose latest book is Chili's, A Global History. Thank you. And Liz Crain, you've got 2 new books in the works. Tell us about your next 2 books.
One comes out in a couple months. It's Grow Your Own, Cultivating, Understanding, and Growing Cannabis. That's with Tin House Books. And then Hello, My Name is Tasty, all different recipes from Portland's Tasty and Sons and Tasty and Alder restaurants.
Wow, you guys are all so accomplished. Oh, my goodness. You were all wonderful. Thank you. Hey, folks, we want you to savor the conversation with us. Please, please subscribe to The Foretop on iTunes, NPR One, or however you get your podcasts. And please leave us a rating while you're there. At facebook.com/theforetop, you can suggest topics for us to discuss. And by the way, I'll probably post some of those World War I Food Administration posters, which are just so interesting. I think people will really enjoy seeing them. And please, of course, like our Facebook page. And tweet us, please, at @4top, all one word. Today's show was recorded in the studios of OPB in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon. And you can also read about the show on the OPB website. Our producer is Alex Ward. Special thanks to OPB audio engineer Zach Carver-Gustin. And our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. I hope you can join us for our next episode, and please tell your friends about The Foretop. And did I mention this before? Please give us some loving feedback in iTunes. Ciao.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
Did anyone leave a tip?